Now we're recording.
All right. Hello and welcome to Pontifacts. I'm Fry.
And I'm Bry, ranking all of the popes from Peter to Francis. But today we are not ranking a pope. We have a very special bonus episode with a very special guest. So I would like to introduce to all of you Eric from Saint Podcast.
Hello. Hi.
Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. So my podcast is it's all about saints, as the title suggests, but it's a historic and cultural exploration of saints' legends. And I guess I only started listening to podcasts sort of relatively recently during the pandemic, and I naturally gravitated towards the history podcasts. And I was looking for a podcast specifically about saints' legends. And there are loads that are devotional, loads that are little prayers, but I wanted something that was more historic. So I was complaining to my boyfriend about it, and he just sort of casually said, "Just make one." I was like, "All right." And so I started it, and here we are in the same podcast. Yeah, so exploring the legends, but pulling out a lot of the the cognates between various medieval legends, pagan legends, sort of ancient Indian, Roman, Phoenician, Egyptian archetypes, and just the weird and wonderful parts of the stories that make up saints' legends.
I think you had a very similar vibe to us when we started getting into doing Pontifacts, because we were looking at the popes as a historical force rather than a religious phenomenon. And so it's very much in the same vein. And I love that you do that, and you also bring this how the stories of the saints are very applicable to modern life, not just as a religious person, but in terms of pop culture and our zeitgeist and how we view identity, which is really really great. So
Oh,
everybody.
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I find interesting about the saints. When I was little, I loved X-Men. And I was raised Catholic, and so for me, saints were like, quote unquote, real X-Men. This is the one you do when you need to like find something that's lost. This is the one who's fire, and this is the thunder one. My love for saints was sort of is went hand in hand with my love for comic books and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff.
I love that, because right now I'm writing a bonus episode about dragon slaying saints. So that's
Ah,
very
amazing. Yeah,
on
so
brand.
many.
there
Awesome.
are
Awesome.
there are a surprising amount of saints that have slain dragons.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
But we're not here to talk about dragon slaying saints today. Well, not in a literal,
Unfortunately.
but perhaps a metaphorical perspective, if you want to sort of get really double entendre in there, because we are going to talk about some pervy aspects of saint art today. So, do you want to give us just a brief summary of where we're going on this journey before we
Sure,
take off?
sure. So, the first time I was really interested in saints was because of these my mom bought me these 4 little books, like kind of tiny squares, each, with stories of saints. And, there was one saint in particular that drew my attention. It was Saint Sebastian. And this
Mm,
was like a shirtless young person, not like an old pope or a monk wearing a hood, someone that I could relate to. But also, the young Eric who didn't know he was gay yet was attracted to this saint for reasons that weren't apparent then, but
mm.
came to the fore later when he became a teen and older. And I just started researching and looking into the saints' iconographies and realizing that a lot of saints, whether male or female, especially after a certain time period, were painted in very, very erotic and sensual ways. And of course, as a good Catholic boy back then, it was just, no, this is just really to celebrate the beauty that is faith.
Yeah.
So, but in researching it deeper and looking into the artists and looking into the people who posed to be these saints, you realize that the story is quite different. And what you're looking at now, and I'm not saying they're not devotional artworks, because they are for some people, but really a lot of the most famous paintings of saints and other religious figures are sort of like the equivalent of, like, X-rated photos that you and like your partner will exchange for each other, because the people who commissioned them were commissioning the bodies and faces of their lovers, male or female.
Absolutely. So we know that when they were being created, eroticism was absolutely part of the process. And this
Sure.
isn't just a Renaissance phenomenon, although it will absolutely take off there.
Yes.
So where does this all start in art? Let's talk about the beginnings of saint depictions and where we go from there to something that is incredibly erotic.
Sure, sure. So the first saint depictions, and the most popular saints, I think, in the early Middle Ages, medieval period, whatever you want to call it, were the virgin martyrs. And
Mhm.
martyrs were, from the Roman era martyrs who, were they died for God. And that was sort of something that was really revered, that they gave their lives up. And the original hagiographies, before there were, depictions, the hagiographies always went into really gory detail on how they were tortured, the way they were tortured before they were killed, the outrageous ways they were killed. Although some of those outrageous ways were added later or changed, or were typos that just kind of kept being carried on. And so the original paintings of saints were super, super gory. They were really stylized, almost kind of cartoony. And in the
Mhm.
Middle Ages, you get a lot of altarpieces, triptychs, and other depictions where you have these figures that aren't really naturalistic. It's a human, but there's like blood all over them, but it looks like almost like red hair, because it's like red all over them. But pictures, paintings of, particularly of women, of virginal women, nude, topless, being tortured horrifically, sexual tortures, and they were not erotic at all, unless, you're someone who really gets off on that kind of violence. But
True.
but I think back then in the medieval times, it wasn't about eroticism. It was, you wanted to get across that these people suffered, that they
Yes.
were in pain just like Christ. So, their pain was like Christ's pain. So, wow, look at this person. She's a superhero, or he's a superhero, because look at all the pain they endured for their religion and for their belief. And I feel like that was the main thrust of medieval art. So it's all gory and it's not erotic at all. Again, unless you're
Mhm.
into that, but that was not. I don't think that was the point back then.
It comes to mind some of the Patreon episodes we've done about saints where we covered like Saint Lucy or Saint Agatha, where we discussed their torture, the breasts being ripped off, the eyeballs being ripped off. This was not at in any way something that is to endear you into that sort of sense of intimacy. This is somebody who is with you with your suffering, which
Yes.
of course is reflective of those time periods because we are still seeing the generational horrors that would have come out of mass persecutions. It's only in the 3rd century that we legalized Christianity, so it's this long legacy of that. And what you were saying about the depiction, of course, always makes me think of Fra Angelico, which is a little later on, but still very much in that style period where
Mm,
you get these crucifixions with just spurting blood fountains. I know
yes. And
Fry
these
has
little
has
angels
enjoyed.
with little angels catching the blood with the cup, and these like distorted figures that look like their limbs and everything's been broken, and it's gruesome stuff. It's gothy and gruesome.
Very human blood sprinklers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Totally, totally. And then I think, I mean, and then while this was going on in Western Europe and sort of the Eastern Christianity, you had the Byzantine style of art, which was more stylized, and it wasn't
Mhm.
gruesome, but it was more, the Byzantine art always would have a big saint in the middle, so big figure that was sort of the height of the canvas, and on either sides would be these panels, almost like a comic book, where you'd
Mhm.
see scenes from the life, and they would always be the scenes of the miracles, the cool and wonderful and strange things that happened. Like they flew, they rose the dead, they exorcised demons, or parted the Red Sea, whatever it was. You would have these scenes on the side, and it was very stylized. The saints were always clothed. The Byzantine art didn't have all the nudity as that the Western art
Mhm.
had. It also wasn't as gory, and it was just more stylized. Um, and
It's
I think
lost
those.
the
Huh?
Roman persuasion.
Yes, exactly, exactly, exactly. And I think these comic book storyboards, basically on either side of the big figure on the canvas, that I feel like was sort of the next step where there were scenes of what was happening. And if you fast forward to, say, the late 1200s, early 1300s, then you're into Giotto, who a lot of
Hmm.
people say, sort of founded the Renaissance, or was proto-Renaissance, and he was
Yeah.
really, yeah, yeah, and I mean, I love his stuff because
Mhm.
it's when it started looking, there was a naturalism, the colors were different, and everything started looking more like real life, although still stylized.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of the paintings he did of Saint Francis and everything was, yeah, just started looking more like the art that we know today.
I'm pulling some images up so Fry can see what we're talking
All
about
right.
here.
Yes.
Yeah, oh,
Yes.
I knew that at least here, yes.
Yeah.
Giotto!
Yeah. And Giotto's stuff isn't erotic either. It's quite straightforward.
Mhm.
It's very reverential. I mean, one of his paintings of the frescoes of St. Francis is nude, but it's part of the story where he takes off his clothes and renounces his earthly life and father and parents to, eventually found the Franciscans. But there's nothing really erotic about it. They're quite reverential, straightforward paintings.
Yeah.
And I don't think it doesn't get pervy, really pervy, until the Renaissance, as you had mentioned as well.
Well,
And
that's a direct correlation to humanism too, because we start to look at the saints as celebrations in the same way that they were earlier in the celebrations of suffering. This is now an era where we celebrate the beauty of humanity, and they
yes,
wanted to celebrate every aspect of that up
yes,
into including the physical.
absolutely. And I think that, you're absolutely right. The humanity of it, the humanism of it, and since all the artists and everyone, the sort of thought, philosophy, art, architecture was harkening back to Greece, ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and we looked at their art, it was very natural, very erotic, all these
Mhm.
beautiful bodies. It was this standard of beauty, which we still have today, rightly or wrongly, right? Probably,
Mhm.
unfortunately, of these, if you're a woman, you were slim, big-breasted, curvy. If you're a man, you were, again, muscular, and the ideal beauty was someone who was young and fit and therefore also
Mhm.
wealthy as well. Um, and artists in the Renaissance took this on, and all of the saints started looking a lot like some of the Greek and Roman figures as well, and some of them have direct cognates. And
Mhm.
for me, the one, so I mentioned Saint Sebastian earlier, when is sort of the first saint that grabbed my attention. And when you look at the first depictions of Saint Sebastian that exist, they're these mosaics from Ravenna around, I think, the 6th century, 5th century, 6th century, and they depict a gray-haired warrior, so a gray-haired soldier wearing like a soldier's outfit or a toga, which is befitting someone of an equestrian class, but gray hair, gray beard, because Saint Sebastian was probably in his mid-40s, maybe 50 when he died, because he was the captain of the Praetorian Guard. And to
Mhm.
become captain, you'd have to have done that for a while. So late 30s, early 40s at the earliest. So those depictions are probably most what he looked like actually in life, if he was a real person, and even the Catholic Church doesn't think he was actually a real person. But he would have been a middle-aged man when he died. But so, and then the Middle Ages, they took off his shirt and stuck loads of arrows in him, just
Mhm.
and made it very gruesome. So he looks like a twisted, almost looks like Gollum, like tied to a tree with arrows at him. So it's not erotic, it's gruesome, and you're like, wow, this saint, he really suffered just like Christ. So he was
Yes.
no longer, and he was still bearded, sometimes white haired, but usually now he would have dark hair or brown hair. So he was a little younger, and the shirt came off, but not for any erotic reason, I think, but more so you could see this guy is bloodied and full of arrows. And I think the original um, yeah, the original the hagiography in English was that he was as full of pricks as an urchin being a hedgehog. And that word prick is important because it started at that time in the Renaissance era to have the same connotation as it does now.
Yes.
So yeah, so full of pricks. And so you have him in this the medieval Saint Sebastian is gruesome, it's gross, it's not erotic. And then what happened in the Renaissance is that so in the medieval era too, Saint Sebastian was a plague saint. You prayed to him for deliverance from the Black Plague, from the bubonic plague.
Hmm.
And a big reason for this is that the arrow has always been since antiquity, and even almost all around the world, a symbol of disease. And
Yeah.
so, you had like Eros or Cupid, right? The Greek or Roman god of love. And he shot arrows because in classical times, love was thought of as a disease. And we've all been lovesick where you just do crazy things you would never do when you're not feeling that way. So they saw it as a disease. And Eros and Cupid also used his arrows to give people STDs if he displeased him. But there was another god of disease who was even more powerful, and that was Apollo. So Apollo was a buff, young god, really strong, one of the most powerful gods in the Roman pantheon and the Greek pantheon. And he also shot arrows, but his arrows delivered more terrible diseases like plague.
Hmm.
Because Saint Sebastian survived being shot with arrows, and a lot of people think he died being shot with arrows, but he actually survived. People and Christians prayed to him for deliverance from and protection against disease because he survived it. And then it was a natural thing in the Renaissance for artists, and artists who today would probably identify as some sort of queer, like Michelangelo and others, latched onto Saint Sebastian as this deliverer from disease, because I think it was a way to paint a hot nude male body um, without any problems. So from the
Absolutely.
medieval gruesome Sebastian, the Renaissance Sebastian was even younger. So now Sebastian's like a 20-year-old, a really fit, athletic 20-year-old with one or two arrows in his body, sometimes not at
Hmm.
all, and he's just holding them. And the models that sat for Saint Sebastian were always the most sought after sex workers of whatever city it was, and lots of wealthy men commissioned paintings of these beautiful men as Saint Sebastian to basically disguise naughty pictures as a devotional image.
Mhm. And there was so much justification there as well, because this is again a saint of a deliverance of disease. This is somebody who is vital. This is somebody who is representing not only in his spiritual strength, but his physical strength, what it is to live up to that image of health, of spiritual purity, of physical purity. There's plenty to celebrate there that isn't just about painting a nice hot man.
Totally. And I think it's important that you talk about the, vitality too. I think that for a plague saint, I think it probably a younger one is more believable than a
Mhm.
middle-aged
Mhm.
one, someone who's in the full flower of youth. Um, so I think, there were lots of reasons why it made sense to do that. And Saint Sebastian, so in the Renaissance, there's this flourishing of paintings of him where all of a sudden there's a period like right before you get to kind of the Baroque era or the Reformation, Counter Reformation, where most Saint Sebastian paintings after that, there's no era at all. And it's
Mhm.
basically just a painting of a topless young 20 something like stud sitting there. And you only know it's Saint Sebastian because the artist said that's Saint Sebastian. There's no halo, no angels, nothing.
No
Sometimes there's a
arrows.
little bit of blood, but
Yeah. They don't wanna mar the beautiful frame that they're painting.
exactly, exactly. And my favorite Saint Sebastian painting is one by Bronzino. So this is later after the Renaissance, and in this painting, it's again this young man, redheaded, who
Oh, yeah.
there's one arrow stuck in the side, like in his rib, but he's not in any pain. But he holds another arrow in his hand, and the way he holds it is that he grasps the shaft of the arrow with one hand, and with the other hand, he's playing with the tip of the arrow with his thumb.
Hmm.
And that becomes quite a common way to depict Saint Sebastian holding an arrow as if it were the size of, let's say, a banana,
Yep.
and shape of a banana, and holding it that way. And what was so scandalous about this painting too was that there were no angels, no halos. He's not looking up into heaven, but he's kind of looking off to the side as if to someone else, and kind of this flirtatious look. And he's
It's
naked
super
except for this.
flirtatious.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I'm
He's
upset that he
sneaky.
looks like the guy from Ratatouille.
He does. He totally does. I had never thought about that before, but I can't unsee that now.
Oh,
He
Fry, you've
absolutely
just ruined this painting for so many people.
My question is, where is Ratatouille in this painting?
Yeah.
Hiding behind that cloak, you know?
Yes.
And I read this one theory, but I started research. I love the theory. I don't believe it's real, but I want it to be, because when I started researching more, it just didn't seem right. But that so Bronzino, well, Bronzino was probably gay, or I should say, he was a man who loved the male form.
Mhm.
And the theory is that this young man who posed for Sebastian was a sex worker who was very popular in Florence, but that Bronzino and a lot of other artists, and also I guess high-ranking people of Florence, were part of the Saint Sebastian Society, and that it was part of this, and that they met in the crypt of a Saint Sebastian church in Florence, and they basically commissioned Bronzino to paint him because he was the young man that always entertained them, and he became their Saint Sebastian. Which I love. I feel like this should be like a Netflix like series or something, or like a Gothic novel. But I don't think it's true. But it's very likely that the person who posed for this was a sex worker. No one of status would dream of posing topless like that. I
Mhm.
think if you were like a Medici or someone really powerful, sure, but you'd be painted as Poseidon, Zeus. You wouldn't be
Aries. Yep.
yeah, Ares,
Mars.
Mars, absolutely. You wouldn't be painted as a sacred figure, because that's kind of like, you can't do that. But you'd be painted as a classical like god, and not a boy saint like this.
Yeah.
So, there were other theories that, oh, this was a wedding portrait, but then that's not a wedding portrait. No one did wedding portraits like that. They were very stylized. You were dressed. No one had a topless wedding portrait. We
No.
do now, I guess, but not
It's a
back then.
courting gift.
Yeah, it's a courting gift. I
It's
don't think
flirtatious enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say too, he very much has that look that would be very popular in Florence. If you look at the Florentine art of that era and you look at the models they were using, oh yeah, he would have fit right in.
Definitely, definitely.
So they all look like the guy from Ratatouille.
They all have
That
that.
we're into.
Yeah, Ratatouille.
They love
is
the cheruby curls and that sort of red or golden red or strawberry blonde, like very into that whole vibe. Not the Ratatouille vibe.
yeah, Ratatouille is the Florentine ideal. Who knew? But,
How dare.
There's another story about a Saint Sebastian painting that was commissioned for a church. What was it? The Church of San Marco in Florence, and it was by Friar Bartolomeo. And the story is, and I don't think it's actually true, because I want to say that it was a story by Vasari, who a lot of his stuff he kind of made up stuff. But it does
Sorry, was
tell
a salty man.
Yeah, exactly. He was fake news, Vasari. But the story that he tells is that the painting was put up in the church, but the priests at the church soon found out from the confessional that the parishioners were having impure thoughts during mass, male and female. And so the friars quickly took it down, and the painting has since been lost. So no one knows what happened to it. But whether it's true or not, it just goes to show that this happened. This was a worry,
Yeah.
that people were like, what is this? So whilst these were being made, it's not that everyone just accepted, yes, this is a great sacred devotional painting. A lot of people are like, what is that? what is this for? What are you worshiping? You're on your knees for what?" And it was a problem.
Yeah. And that has a long-standing tradition too. I'm sure you've heard of Le Chien du Mal, the sexy Satan that went up in the church in the 1800s that completely distracted all of the parishioners. And so
Yeah,
they took it down and commissioned a new one, which turned out to be even hotter.
other.
Yep. That's great.
It was the devil's will,
Yeah.
you know?
Eroticism in church does not go away.
No, no, no. And even with the Sistine Chapel, right, the Last Judgment fresco, how it
Yes.
had to be covered up after Michelangelo passed away. They had his, I think his assistant, like,
Mhm.
put underwear on. And there's that little bit where Saint Catherine of Siena is sort of bending over, and Saint Blaise is behind her. And he was martyred by having these like iron combs rigged over his body. So he's standing behind her with his hands raised, holding the combs. She's bent over, picking up her wheel. So it
Mhm.
looks like before this painter changed it, St. Blaise was taking her from behind. And there were all of these different
Yeah.
sort of little bits of the Last Judgment fresco. Yeah. So if you imagine like St. Blaise, before he was corrected, he was looking down at St. Catherine. She was naked, he was naked. He wasn't holding
Mhm.
yeah, and it was just like, what's happening there? And loads of, you know, private parts were covered up,
Mhm.
I have
because
seen this painting before, but I definitely did not know that. I just commented on how buff the ladies were.
right.
St. Catherine is buff as
So
Yeah.
heck.
buff.
I mean, Michelangelo didn't really paint women well because I think
No.
he wasn't interested. And a lot of academics talk about how he frequented the baths, the stufi, which the all male baths, and he would go to the men's baths to let's say study male anatomy, and that's where he gets all of these forms and things from. And I guess
Mhm.
there were no women in there, so he didn't study women from life.
No.
That's fair.
Not interested.
That's a gentle way of putting
Yes.
it.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I think the Renaissance happened, and as we said, it wasn't that everyone thought this was okay. Um, there were loads of church officials and just everyday people too who saw that this was erotic. They didn't like it. They were anti, and when the Counter Reformation happened and the Reformation happened, I think a lot of the Protestant, um, I guess their problems with Catholicism, some of it was about the artwork. It was
Mhm.
overtly erotic, and I think by the time the Reformation happened, a lot of it was just overt. People weren't trying
Yes.
to pretend either. There was just loads of mistresses and lovers were being painted as the Madonna or as Mary Magdalene, and it was scandalous stuff. But they were desired by everyone: cardinals, bishops, popes, bankers. They all commissioned these paintings so they could hang them in their private devotional chamber for private devotions. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. One of one of my favorite one of these is was the Maloon Diptych by
Oh,
Jean
yes.
Hey.
Agnes Sorel.
Yes, and it's so bizarre. The painting is gorgeous. It's so bizarre. It looks so modern as well, like almost like a postmodern sort
Yes.
of painting. But yeah, the model, the breast and the face were of Agnes Sorel, as you just mentioned, who was one of the beauties of her time. And she was the mistress of the King Charles the fifth, sixth, one of the
Think
King
so.
Charles, one of the King Charleses, who commissioned the painting from Fouquet, because he wanted to honor his mistress, and
Mhm.
hung in the private chapel at the castle. And I think loads of people rich people had their mistresses painted and honored in this way, whereas their wives had standard formal portraits, as themselves, whereas their mistresses got to be gods and goddesses.
Well, and the interesting thing about this one in particular is there's no plausible deniability here. Agnes Sorel famously tailored her clothes to specifically display her favorite breast, and here we are with a very this is not a breastfeeding Jesus.
No,
That
Jesus is
Jesus
nowhere
doesn't.
near. He's not
Jesus
even.
doesn't look interested.
no, he's not. He's not looking at her. He's looking off to the side somewhere.
Yeah,
They're not connecting at all,
none.
and it really is. She's looking down at whoever is looking up at the painting, which is clearly would be the King Charles.
Yes. So there's no way he can pass this off as the Madonna without everybody knowing exactly who it's supposed to be. So this is definitely that idea of being overt and being shameless because nobody's getting away with this and thinking, "Oh no, that's Mary."
Right, right.
You
And
dirty-minded people.
yeah, but I think it's an amazing piece because the style, it's so bizarre but
It is
beautiful and
bizarre.
graphic with these shapes and everything. It's gorgeous.
It
Um,
actually reminds me very strongly, especially with the very, very red cherubs. It
hmm,
reminds me of all of the American Horror Story iconography that they
yes,
use,
Oh
like the
yeah,
red bloody latex. Like I'll pull it
yeah,
back up.
just in
See,
the background. Yeah.
yeah, like these are American Horror Story latex babies.
totally, totally,
So modern feeling in that
hmm,
way.
totally. Yeah, and so I think the Protestants weren't wrong that there was a lot of corruption in the Church in Rome, and a lot of this was not devotional.
Hmm.
So I guess when the Reformation happened, obviously the church responded with the Counter-Reformation, and part of the Counter-Reformation was a bunch of rules on what you could and couldn't do in paintings. So having the Madonna naked was one of the what was now forbidden. You weren't supposed to have Mary Magdalene naked either, although people still did. Saint Sebastian was no longer supposed to be depicted wearing nothing. And so, whilst I think a lot of the Catholic artists did sort of change tact. They did a bit in the north. They certainly didn't. So the breastfeeding Madonna, the Madonna lactans we just saw by Jean Fouquet, in the north they continue to have this, and you have all these really pervy breastfeeding
Yes.
paintings where the baby Jesus looks like a naughty schoolboy, and he's like grabbing the breast, looking at the viewer like, ha ha.
Oh yeah,
And
the ones where he's like gnawing. Yeah, like
yeah,
he's doing
yeah.
a grab.
Doing a grab or reaching down into his mother's blouse, but with this like face, this kind of grin on his face that is
Hmm.
Not
clearly
a
not.
baby face.
No, not a baby face. And then you also get a lot of these Madonna Lactans paintings where the baby Jesus is like, is he 13? How old is
Yes.
this Jesus? And there was definitely a choice by the artist, and I don't think, especially in the Protestant North, where they didn't revere Mary, this was not devotional.
Hmm.
There was something else going on there. But I think back in the Catholic countries, you still had people like Caravaggio, who he was definitely part of the painting during the Counter Reformation, and he didn't have nudity per se in his paintings, but they were still really, really scandalous because his lovers again were painted as these sacred figures. One of his favorites was another painter named Francesco Boneri, nicknamed Cecco, and Caravaggio painted Cecco as John the Baptist several times, and you can see Cecco grow up when you
Yeah.
look at the various paintings where he's quite young to begin with.
Very young. Very
Yeah.
young. In the one with the
Oh,
ram?
yes, alarmingly. And the one with the ram too, he doesn't even look like John the Baptist. He looks like Pan or Bacchus or something. It's
Yes.
so pagan, but it's called John the Baptist, so I guess it is. And then later on, he's clearly a teenager. Yeah,
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
it's so pagan, and I think again, there are no religious symbols in this to anchor this as a sacred painting.
Right. And
Yeah,
and
what's
they
John
just
the Baptist doing?
Yeah.
well, and they've sort of he's and this is the thing about Caravaggio being so deliberately provocative
Mm,
because the symbol that we'd be looking for with John the Baptist is a small lamb.
Yes.
And what do we have here instead? We have a ram
Right.
specifically to circumvent and
Yeah, just turn it upside
invert.
down.
Yeah, invert
Yeah,
this idea that we should be seeing for John the Baptist to
absolutely.
make a
It
very
makes it so
provocative statement.
pagan. Totally.
Yeah.
And it's so pagan, so provocative, and there's nothing to anchor it as a sacred image. And
Mhm.
it's interesting, for the male gaze, it was really the men were Saint Sebastian and John the Baptist were the most popular. The women, it was Mary Magdalene and also Catherine of Siena. And I think it's interesting because Catherine and also Judith, the Old Testament heroine.
Mhm.
And I think the interesting thing about Judith and Catherine of Siena is that Catherine of Alexandria. They even in the Renaissance, they were never painted in an erotic way because I think their stories were all about how badass they were.
Yes.
And so a lot of the mistresses that were painted were women who were known to be super fiery and super
Mhm.
sort of like. So Caravaggio painted um, his friend and possibly lover Philida as Judith, and you know Philida was meant she was one of the most popular courtesans in Rome,
Mhm.
and but she was also known as someone's like, don't mess with her. She knows her stuff. She can take care of herself. So she was painted as Judith because Judith kills the enemy general Holofernes. And so she was thought of as a badass. So a lot of strong women were painted as Judith.
Mhm.
And I think, but even these paintings would have been used as, I think, private devotional aids.
Absolutely. I love this one too because there's so much violence in this Caravaggio
Totally.
painting, which I think is only really topped by Artemisia, who we could have a whole other conversation about because she's
Yes.
portrayed herself in that, which is
Yes.
wonderful.
Yes, and
But
I wonder what story she's telling from her life, or
oh,
stories, probably like every man who told her no.
there is so much rage in the Artemisia version of this. But what I love about the Caravaggio here is that she's committing an act of intense violence. There's blood spurting out everywhere. And she just looks like she's telling him to quit being a little bitch. She is
Hmm.
not phased at all about what she's doing. She's just like, oh, shut up already. Like, I'm
She's
doing just,
calm, she's
yeah.
serene,
It'll
she's just like
it'll
this
be
pillar
over
of
in a
smoke.
minute. Come on.
Yeah.
Exactly. I
Sorry,
love
not
that.
sorry.
Exactly. Like and there it makes sense that they would portray their feistiest of courtesans in that way because that's the inversion again of this idea of like male power. It's like, "Ooh, she could top you."
Right,
And the
exactly,
excitement of that moment is being represented in this very powerful female story from the Bible, which is very cool.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Here- Here's the
Um,
Saint
hmm?
Catherine of Alexandria one for Fry as well.
All right.
She's gonna stab you.
Yes,
Mm,
she is.
I love again the expression. It's just so powerfully like "don't mess with me," and
yeah.
how attractive that is to the right audience. It's very cool.
Exactly. And I think, and obviously Catherine of Alexandria, she was the brightest mind of her generation. She was able to outwit the smartest men from the Roman Empire and even the Roman Emperor himself. So I think,
Mhm.
painting someone as Saint Catherine is to say, this one's smart. Don't mess with her. She knows more than you do.
It's very appealing.
Hmm. There was also Cristofano Allori, who was
Mm.
a sort of I guess, a Baroque era painter who also his mistress or his lover was this woman who was affectionately called La Matafida, who had a fiery temper, and so she was also painted as these similar figures. But I think, like, it's always been interesting to me to link these popular saints and their Greek and Roman counterparts. So Mary Magdalene, who was painted very erotically by lots of artists, her legend lends itself to it because it's
Mhm.
not true, but she's been cast as this prostitute who begs forgiveness, and redeems herself. So a lot of paintings show her as a fallen prostitute about to repent, which means that she's naked. So of course, so she's totally nude and perhaps in tears. praying on her knees. And so loads of mistresses were painted that way. Lovers were painted that way. But also in the Renaissance, she started being painted. She was painted often as a Venus-like character, lying down on a couch with an attendant angel, the way Venus would have been with Cupid. And whoever was, there might be a male figure in it, which often would be the lover, almost, so mirroring the Roman and Greek iconographies as well. In the same way that Saint Sebastian very much mirrors the Apollo iconography. So Apollo basically made Saint Sebastian much younger than his medieval self and gave him muscles and made him attractive. And John the Baptist is this shepherd trope, this sort
Yeah.
of the ancient shepherd boy. When from Greek mythology, you have people like Endymion, who was so I think it was the goddess of the moon saw him sleeping. He was so beautiful that she made him sleep forever. So every time she raced her chariot across the sky, she could gaze upon his body. Or Ganymede, who was a beautiful shepherd boy that Zeus fell in love with and kidnapped and took to Olympus to make his cupbearer. And so John the Baptist is just another line of these shepherd boy tropes. And a lot of the paintings mirror the Ganymede paintings or the Endymion paintings as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, because he becomes, at least in some part, biblically, almost a spiritual father to Jesus in the one who baptizes him, and yet the imagery is all very much the younger male to
Yeah.
take in, which is again
And this
a shift how much they're manipulating and negotiating what they're portraying in order to portray what they actually want, which is
right,
for
to
their own
portray
purposes.
what the customer is asking for. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I mean the first surviving paintings of John the Baptist are of an older man, bearded, a hermit. He's dirty, he looks smelly because he's a wandering hermit, completely clothed. And but during the Renaissance, there started to become this trend of depicting the Holy Family. So you'd have Mary and Joseph as sort of young parents, Jesus as an infant, and because John the Baptist was his slightly older cousin, he would be a toddler. But
Mm.
you also had the idea of John the Baptist being in the wilderness. So he was a hermit and he was a shepherd of souls before Jesus was a shepherd of souls. So he started being depicted as a shepherd. So soon he was half clothed, so he would have a shepherd's loincloth that sort of exposed one nipple, one side of his chest. And then with the Holy Family depictions, he started becoming younger and younger and just started looking like a hot guy. A hot guy wearing a loincloth with surrounded by sheep.
Well, exactly, because these powerful men are not exactly taking lovers that are old, dirty hermit men.
Exactly. And there's an example of Leonardo da Vinci
Mm,
painted a John the Baptist of his lover, a painter and a young man named Salai. And
yes.
this painting was commissioned by a wealthy banker. And so when the original painting had Salai in this pose holding a cross so that it was clearly a religious painting. But when the banker took it home, he realized he had these impure thoughts. So he came back to Da Vinci to say, you have to change this. Can you please make him a secular shepherd boy? So Da Vinci repainted it, took out so the background was no longer like the inside of a hermit's cave, but had a landscape. He took off the cross and just made him gesturing to the sky. The banker took it home, but it was still too much for him to bear, so he threw it into a river. And
Ugh.
we have paintings that now because there were copies that were made, but the original
Mhm.
paintings were thrown in a river because it caused him too much grief, and he was just too, I guess, inspired by them and was
I
afraid of his soul.
That's very interesting too, that he thought that making it a secular image would make it less attractive and less arousing to him, rather than the other way
Well,
around, which is
maybe
generally the
it
way
was
we would
he
think of
felt
it.
bad about it. He felt bad that it was
A saint.
holy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I
he
just don't think you could win, right? He can't win.
look, I want to lust over this, so please put in a neutral background so I feel less shameful about it, but then I'll throw it in the river anyways, I guess.
Really, he
Just
should
like
just say 5 Hail Marys and 4 Our Fathers. Flagellation.
exactly. He's been a bad boy. Oh wait, we're back on the same track now.
Right, right.
No, I love I love this one.
I just,
It's
and
such a
what
perfect.
fascinates me about all of this stuff too is that, so many people when we go into a museum or go into a church that's full of art, there's this reverence. You're like, wow, beautiful, awesome. And it is, but what
Mhm.
you don't realize is, I would say, like, easily a third of the people you see there are sex workers and illicit lovers. Nothing wrong with that, but
Yep.
just understand that, we sort of, think of museums and things almost like the library. It's all good, and it's sort of like, very, you have to be quiet and respectful because it was always that. It's like, no, no, not really. It's kind of just like Instagram. There's some stories that aren't so, like, buttoned up, and I think they're far more interesting than what the museum labels say. And I wish that museums would start talking about the models
Mhm.
rather than just the painting itself and who commissioned it and why. But the real reason, why they've commissioned it, and they don't.
Yeah. It would add to the richness of the understanding of the art
Mm,
because one of my favorite things about what we get to do in our podcast is talk about the humanity in these roles that are relatively unquestioned at certain periods in
yes.
time. So bringing that human element to it makes it so much richer, and that is so true about art as well. There is so much more you can take from a painting looking at and understanding who that person was to the painter and why they chose to use this particular character, this particular saint, why they chose the poses that they did. There's so much more than just this is where the light hits that makes it so
Yeah,
much more fascinating.
absolutely, and so much more than just, "Oh, this is the Madonna and Child, and it's the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus." Like, yeah, but that's a real person. Who is that person? Because, all the painters had models. They didn't paint Most of them didn't paint from memory.
And there's a richness there too in the implication that this also sort of suggests the humanity of the saint that we're talking about.
Mm,
We've lost a lot of that in at least the way the church hardline describes sainthood as these people who are pure and whatnot. But a lot of
perfect.
them were real people
Mm,
who came to their faith or converted after a life of sin or all of these aspects or struggled with fear and doubt
had
and
doubt. Yeah,
humanity. So it would benefit
I
the
think
actual
so.
story and the devotional to do the same thing that we're doing with art.
I think so. And I think what's interesting too about this sacred art is that it was one of the few places where the abject poor and the really wealthy met.
Mhm.
Because all the people painted were the poorest of
Poor
people. And
people.
yeah, and sex work, the way we think about it now, back then, like, if you wanted to live, if you want to eat, and I don't think it wasn't thought of in the same way as it was today. It was just something that unfortunately a lot of people just had to do. And but sitting for a painter was one of those things. But a lot of the times they became lovers, and that's also a story that you don't hear about, the relationships between the painters and their muses.
Which loses a lot of the intimacy in the work as
Mm,
well.
yes,
And
absolutely,
and you're
absolutely.
right about it being a place where poverty and wealth meet because
Mm,
this was often we're still painting relatively idealized versions of people until like
oh,
Caravaggio, because Caravaggio is painting his homeless friends as homeless friends.
yes, yes,
But
with
up
like
until
dirt
this
on their
point,
feet and stuff. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. So we're seeing this, but this would have been an experience for people who would have never
yeah, and
had any
shocking.
exposure. Yeah, exactly. In life, it's quite an interesting parallel to like this is where we have these inception points. It was providing not only a way of life and a way of survival for people, but also like showing them their idealized selves in the same I don't know brushstroke, really.
Yes. Yes, yes. And I think, the choices the artists make also tell us about the people of the time. They tell us a
Hmm.
bit about the history, the social history of it all. Yeah, it's a shame. And I know museum labels, no one wants to read, like, paragraphs and paragraphs, but I think, I would love the chance to, like, go through a museum and just like, let me just add a sentence here, or
Yeah.
add a detail here. Um, yeah.
This is why My husband loves to go to a museum with me. I'll give the tour.
Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't have to read all the things.
Why? So when I was thinking about coming on to talk to you both, I was trying to find popes that specifically commissioned paintings of their lovers. I only found one
Mm,
definitively. I found one definitively, and that was Alexander the Sixth.
yes.
So he had
Miss
his one of his
Farnese.
yes, Miss Farnese, his lovely lover, painted as the Virgin Mary. So I mean, imagine the Pope painting your lover, and they're supposed to be celibate, right?
Mhm.
As the Madonna, although the fresco has been since destroyed, but and the Pope is kneeling before her.
That was I wanna make this point too because he is kneeling in subjugation and
Yes,
adoration of the Mary, who is his
lover.
mistress.
So
It's
obviously,
fantastic.
good for her, but it's
Mhm.
shocking, and the fact that Christ is on her lap, giving a symbol of blessing is almost as if he's blessing their relationship.
Mhm,
God approves.
mhm.
Christ approves of what you're doing.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
He's
and
got his little prayer hand.
he does, making a symbol, rabbit ears.
Mhm.
And the two figures are connected through the baby Jesus figure because they're both
Yes.
touching him. So it's almost like, their union is literally connected by him. And it's almost like he's just telling the world, it's cool. God says it's all right. You know?
I'm in charge, and God says it's fine.
Exactly.
We're touching through spiritual union, and that's okay.
Exactly. Which is probably one of the least horrible things he did, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll both get into that later.
I think that
Oh,
is our
eventually.
most yeah, that is our most anticipated episode by far.
I can't wait.
It's such an era, and it's so funny because everybody knows him, but that whole era is gonna be popes exactly like this, so there's
Yes.
so many stories to tell.
Right, right. Yeah, so what else?
Um,
Yeah,
well, what
time
I want
for
to bring up, just because it's not exactly hold on, where did it go? I lost it. I was going to talk a little bit about Simonetta Vespucci, only because she was rumored to be the lover of the Medici, but most of what she was portrayed in was actually more on the Roman side. She was Venus. She did
right,
appear once as Mary, but I don't think there's anything. Yeah, I don't think there was anything particularly religiously significant about that one.
right.
So, we can
And I
skip
and I
over
wonder
that.
I wonder why some people, yeah, because there are a lot of lovers who are portrayed as Roman and Greek gods and goddesses. I wonder
Mhm.
why some of them became Christian figures, whereas others were pagan figures. Was it a decision like, "Ooh, I don't wanna risk getting in trouble?" Or was it they just preferred that? Was it just more illicit?
I
Becau
think that it has more to do with the interesting alignment that you see during the Renaissance with there was never a movement away from Christianity, and that should be importantly stated because if you were a Renaissance leader and you suddenly were like, "Well, I don't know about the whole God thing," that wouldn't have gone well for you. But we do have, for example, the Medici, who were very interested in aligning themselves with the Roman and the Greek gods of knowledge, and particularly because they were such incredible patrons of science and development and innovation. I think there was sort of a greater interest in those particular individuals for gods beyond the gods or
Right.
gods beyond God that
Yes,
we
yes, yes.
see a more inclination to just sort of try that out and see, well, what if I made my lover the goddess of beauty? This is a fantastic thing for me because I'm testing those waters and expanding my reach without deliberately angering the church.
Right. And I suppose it's a symbolism, it's maybe a mark of intelligence. I've read these, I
Yes.
know what these are as well.
Hmm.
Status symbol, right?
Yeah. I mean, it only works so well for the Medici because then we have Savonarola, but Then we're gonna burn all of these paintings anyways, but there is I know.
So, yeah.
I know. And of course, the only ones that survive from Savonarola's monastery are the ones from Fra Angelico because they were not so sensual.
Right. They were boring, quote unquote.
But it is interesting because this is obviously a practice that the popes were engaged in. The I guess the only other one we could talk about with any sort of direct correlation to this idea of portraying saints a certain way is Julius. But Julius is an interesting character because even though he was commissioning the Sistine Chapel, or at least carrying on the commission of the Sistine Chapel and those pieces, this was a man who very much wanted to appear to be chaste, which is the opposite of what we know about him now. He was incredibly philanderous and had many affairs and had children outside of wedlock. But it is interesting when we look at how Michelangelo uses that against him. Michelangelo uses his own lovers when he's depicting in his paintings rather than what Julius would want because he's sort of sticking it to Julius anyways. You want to appear to be so pious. I'm still going to slide in all of these things that are very suggestive just to mess with you.
Right.
We know that there are several painted insults in the Sistine Chapel as well, directed specifically at Julius. So,
Right. Okay. That's very cool. Yeah, and I know with the Last Judgment painting, there was a critic of Michelangelo's painted as a demon with a snake biting his crotch at the bottom right, sort of near the hell area.
yes, that hell area gets very intense as well.
Yeah, and apparently loads of those figures are people Michelangelo didn't like.
Mm-hmm. And there are cherubs, which are basically flipping off the Pope.
Yes, yes, and apparently a lot of the cherubs' behinds were based on one of Michelangelo's lovers named Febo de Poggio, who was famous for having the best behind in Rome. FYI.
You gotta have a good butt if you're going to appear in a painting.
Exactly. And
That's
he had
With
way
this
a
too.
best butt.
cherub,
Yeah.
they're so round.
Yeah.
Capuligian.
He did his squats.
I think that covers everything that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah. That was
So
fun.
I guess this is a good place we can wrap it up. So Eric, thank you so much for giving us your time and coming to talk about all of this with us. Do you know what your next episode is going to be about? Can we ask?
Yes. The next episode I'm currently making is about Saint Dominic, known as the Hound of the Lord.
Ooh, that'll be
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
And if you had to pick a favorite, because we've covered many saints on our Patreon series, and you and I have had many discussions about saints, but if you had to pick a favorite, who are you going with? Is it still
I-
Saint Sebastian?
Yeah, I think it has to be Saint Sebastian, just for sort of old time's sake. Although I have to say, Hildegard von Bingen is pretty badass. So she's up there.
We're big fans of Saint Guy 4.
Ah,
For
So where can people find your podcast if they're looking for you after this,
It's,
which they absolutely should?
yes, it's everywhere. Spotify, Apple, Google. It's on all the main all the podcast platforms. There's a website too, saintpodcast.com. Saint is spelled out, so it's not ST, it's SAINT.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
And
you for inviting me. That was fun.
so with that, we can say thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
And there.